She almost didn't get in. That half-second of hesitation. Fingers hovering over the door handle. Rain sliding off the chrome trim of a black Genesis G90. That single moment would rearrange the entire architecture of Imani Osei's life. But she was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-tired, exhausted. The kind that lives behind your eyes after a 12-hour ICU shift where 2 patients coded and 1 didn't make it back. Her scrubs were still damp from the sanitizer splash near Bay 4. Her braids were tucked under a hood that had long stopped being waterproof. And the app said the car was a black sedan, license plate ending in 74. This plate ended in 74. She got in. The interior smelled like cedarwood and something colder, like an office where decisions happen that the rest of the world never hears about. The leather seat received her with a quiet luxury she wasn't expecting from a rideshare. The partition between the back and front seats was down, and the driver, if you could call him that, wasn't wearing the little Uber lanyard. He wasn't wearing anything that said he was supposed to be there at all. He was wearing a charcoal suit. At 11:40 on a Wednesday night, in the rain, outside Seoul General Hospital staff exit, a man in a tailored charcoal suit sat behind the wheel of a car that smelled like cedarwood and power. Imani's thumb was already pulling up the app to confirm the ride when she noticed his eyes in the rearview mirror. He was already looking at her, not the startled glance of a driver who just noticed a passenger, not the polite acknowledgement. He was watching, calm, still, with an expression that held something between amusement and calculation. His eyes were dark and unhurried, the kind that had learned long ago that panic was a waste of energy. And he was smiling, just slightly. Just enough. "You're not my Uber," Imani said. It wasn't a question. The man's smile didn't move. "No," he said simply, his Korean-accented English unhurried and low. "I am not." She should have opened the door. Every rational, safety-trained part of her brain, the part that had sat through hospital security seminars and self-defense workshops, was composing a very clear exit strategy. She didn't move, because outside, the rain had shifted from steady to torrential in the span of 4 seconds. Because her actual Uber had just canceled, she felt the buzz of the notification against her palm. Because the man in the charcoal suit had not locked the doors, had not reached for anything, had not changed his expression from that quiet, unreadable calm. And because, though she would not admit this for weeks, something about the stillness of him made her feel, irrationally, impossibly, safer than the dark, empty street outside. "I'll call another car," she said. The surge pricing at this hour, in this rain, from this district, he glanced briefly at the downpour beyond the windshield, will be considerable. "I know how surge pricing works." "I'm sure you do." A pause. "I'm going to Mapogu. If that's anywhere close to where you're going, you're welcome to the ride." "No obligación." "Door is unlocked." Imani looked at the door handle, looked at the rain, looked at the rearview mirror where his eyes had returned to the road with the patience of someone who genuinely didn't care either way. Mapogu was 4 blocks from her apartment. "You drive your own car?" she asked, because the question felt like a way to stay in control of a situation that was quietly slipping. "Tonight I do." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." His name, she would learn it in pieces, the way you learn a city by walking it rather than studying the map, was Cha Junho. But she didn't learn it that night. That night, he drove. She sat behind him with her hospital bag on her lap and her phone in her hand, watching the neon reflections of Gangnam blur into watercolor streaks across the wet windows. Seoul at midnight in the rain looked like a city dreaming of itself. All light and motion, and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by millions of people and belonging to none of them. Imani had been in Korea for 14 months. She'd come for a 2-year nursing contract at Seoul General, recruited through a medical exchange program that her mother had called interesting and her best friend Dara had called unhinged. She'd learned enough Korean to navigate the hospital, the subway, the corner convenience stores where she bought ramen at midnight and ate it standing over her kitchen sink, because sitting down felt too much like stopping. She did not think about going home. Home was complicated. Korea was simple, in the way that hard things can be simple when they're also far away from everything that hurt you before. The car slowed a light on Dongjak Bridge. Below, the Han River was a long black mirror interrupted by rain. Imani found herself looking at it without meaning to, the way certain views demand your attention even when your mind is somewhere else entirely. You work at Seoul General, Junho said. It wasn't a question either. He'd seen the badge, probably. Or the scrubs. Yes. I see you. She looked up. What makes you say that? He glanced at her in the mirror, just briefly. The way you're sitting, like someone who's been holding themselves upright all day and just now realized they can stop. The accuracy of it caught in her chest like a small, unexpected thing. Yes, she said again. I see you. He nodded once and returned his eyes to the road. Said nothing else. Didn't ask where she was from, didn't comment on her accent, didn't perform the awkward curiosity that she'd grown used to navigating. He simply drove, and the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the particular silence of two people who have both, in their own different ways, learned that words are not always the most honest form of communication. She almost asked his name before he pulled up to the corner of her street. Almost. This is your stop, he said. She looked at the building. Her building, the one with the broken light over the entrance, and the landlady who left persimmons outside her door, sometimes for no apparent reason. How did you know which corner? You typed it into the app, he said. When you first got in, before you realized. She had forgotten. She'd muscle memorized the action. Destination entered before she'd even processed that something was wrong. Right. She reached for the door. Hesitated one breath too long. Thank you. Get some rest, he said. And there was something in it, not romantic, not performative, just genuine, the way a person speaks when they actually mean what they're saying. She stepped into the rain and didn't look back. She told herself she didn't think about it again. She thought about it for 3 days. If you've ever felt seen by a stranger in a way the people closest to you never managed, you already understand exactly what just happened to her. Subscribe, because this story is only beginning, and the truest moments are always the ones nobody plans for. On the 4th day, she saw him again. Not in a car. Not at night. In a sunlit Pojangmaka near Uenaru Station. The kind of covered street stall that smells permanently of fishcake broth and the particular warmth of charcoal under a flat grill. She was off shift, wearing her own clothes for the first time in what felt like a geological era. Dark jeans, an oversized cream sweater, her braids loose around her shoulders. He was sitting at the end of the counter with a paper cup of barley tea and a folder of documents. He was reading with the focused composure of someone accustomed to making important decisions in inconvenient places. She almost walked past. Her feet made a different choice. You're not my Uber, she said. He looked up, and the smile, that same quiet, slightly amused expression, returned as though it had simply been waiting. No, he said. I'm not. She sat down 2 stools away, ordered tekkbokki and an Americano from the Harabiyaji behind the grill, and stared at the street while her food arrived. He went back to his documents. She went back to pretending she wasn't hyper-aware of every small sound he made. The soft turn of a page, the quiet set of a cup back against the counter. Do you live near here? She asked eventually, because the silence had filled up with too much unspoken. I have a building near here, he said. A building. Several, actually. She turned to look at him fully for the first time in full daylight. He was older than she'd initially processed. Mid-30s, maybe, with the kind of face that had been sharpened by experience rather than just time. Sharp jaw, careful eyes, hands that looked like they'd been built for precision. There was a faded scar along his left jawline. Thin and silver, the kind you stop noticing after it becomes part of a face you've memorized. She was not memorizing his face. Several buildings, she repeated. Real estate. He offered, without further elaboration. Is that what's in the folder? He closed it in one smooth motion. No. She ate her tekkbokki. He drank his tea. A street vendor 2 stalls down was selling hadiyak, and the smell of brown sugar caramelizing in oil drifted past like an argument for staying exactly where you were. I'm Imani, she said. I know. She set down her chopsticks. Excuse me. Your badge, he said simply. 4 nights ago. Imani Osei, RN. Seoul General Hospital. You were wearing it when you got in my car. The explanation was so reasonable that it almost covered the feeling, that low, atmospheric unease of being known by someone who has given you nothing in return. Almost. And you are? She asked. Cha Junho. He said it the way people say names they've carried long enough to have made peace with what they mean. Not with pride, exactly. With a certain resigned ownership. Do you make a habit of picking up strangers in the rain? Cha Junho. Only the ones who look like they need somewhere dry to sit for a few minutes. It should have sounded like a line. It didn't. That was the unsettling thing about him. He consistently said things that should have felt rehearsed and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, didn't. They ended up walking. She still wasn't sure how that happened. The rain had cleared, and Seoul in the late morning sun was a different city entirely. Less dreamlike, more insistent. The Han River path near Yeoneo was scattered with joggers and a few older couples walking the kind of walk that only decades of habit produces. Imani walked beside Junho, with approximately 6 inches of deliberate space between them, and tried to understand why she was doing this at all. She was practical by profession and by nature. Her colleagues at Seoul General called her Imani, the professional, because she didn't flinch, didn't spiral, didn't take the emotional shortcut when the clinical path was available. She had come to Korea alone. She had built a life here alone, carefully, intentionally. She did not get in strangers' cars and then take morning walks with them 4 days later. Except apparently she did. What do you actually do? She asked, watching a pair of herons stand motionless at the river's edge as though they'd forgotten they could move. Junho was quiet for 3 full steps. Then, I manage certain interests. That's what people say when they don't want to answer. Yes. Are you going to answer? Not today. She exhaled through her nose. The exhale of a person who is more amused than she wants to be. Okay. Does that bother you? I work with people in crisis, she said. I've learned that what someone doesn't say is usually more important than what they do. So no, it doesn't bother me. It just tells me something. He looked at her then, a longer look than before, more considered, as if something had shifted slightly in the way he was reading her. What does it tell you? That whatever it is you do, you've had to protect it long enough that the habit is automatic now. You don't even notice you're doing it anymore. The heron at the river's edge lifted suddenly, silently, and crossed the water in one long, unhurried arc. Junho watched it. You're perceptive, he said. I'm a nurse. We're trained to notice what people are hiding behind the face they show us. And what am I hiding? She considered him. The careful posture, the controlled expression, the folder of documents he'd closed without hesitation, the buildings he owned without explaining. The scar on his jaw, the way his eyes moved through every space like they were still assessing it, even when the rest of him was perfectly still. Responsibility, she said finally. A lot of it. More than you chose. He didn't respond, but something in the set of his shoulders changed, almost imperceptibly, the kind of shift that only happens when something lands exactly where a person least expected it. They walked the rest of that stretch in silence. She didn't see him for 11 days after that. During those 11 days, she worked 4 night shifts, 2 days, and one brutal stretch from Friday evening to Sunday afternoon, during which the ICU received 3 critical admissions in 18 hours. She ate convenience store gimbap over her sink. She video called Dura, who was in London now and had opinions about everything, including the fact that Imani mentioned a man twice in 40 minutes without appearing to notice she was doing it. You said a guy I met, and then this person I ran into, and those are the same person, Dara said with the pointed accuracy of 15 years of friendship. Da-da. I'm not saying anything. I'm just noting the linguistic data. He's a stranger. You walked along the Han River with a stranger for 2 hours. It wasn't 2 hours. Was it more or less than 90 minutes? Imani ended the call. She did not think about the way he'd said, get some rest. Genuine, unhurried, like someone who understood what rest actually cost. She did not think about the scar on his jaw, or the folder he'd closed, or the particular quality of silence he brought into every space he occupied, the way certain materials absorb sound. She didn't. On the 11th day, she found an envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a single card, handwritten in clean, precise Korean. There's a tea house in Buckshin I think you would like. If you find yourself in that neighborhood, Alum Tea House, near the stone steps. No obligación. G. She read it 4 times. Then she set it on her kitchen table next to the landlady's persimmons, which had arrived again, wordlessly, impossibly punctual, and she stared at both of them for a long moment. The next morning, on her day off, she took the subway to Buckshin. Alum Tea House sat at the top of a narrow lane in Buckshin Hannock Village, tucked between two restored traditional houses with curved tile roofs and walls that had absorbed 300 years of Seoul winters. The stone steps leading up to it were uneven and worn smooth by an incalculable number of feet, and climbing them felt like crossing a threshold between the city's noise and something older, slower, more honest. Imani arrived at 10 in the morning. The wooden door was already open. Inside, low wooden tables sat on heated floors, and the air held the layered scent of dried chrysanthemum and roasted barley and something faintly smoky that she couldn't name. A Hanyo diving photograph hung on one wall, the kind of old black and white image that makes you feel the cold of the water just by looking at it. Traditional celadone cups sat on a shelf near the window, each one slightly different, as though they'd each had a separate conversation with the kiln. Junho was already there. Of course he was. He sat at the table nearest the window, with 2 cups already poured and a small dish of yagua, the honey cookies she had fallen into the habit of buying from the bakery near the hospital. He looked different here than he had in the car, or at the Pojamika, or along the river path. Slightly less composed, as though the tea house had asked something honest of him, and he'd had no choice but to answer. "How did you know I'd come?" she asked, sliding onto the floor cushion across from him. "I didn't," he said. "I come here on my days off anyway. I just thought you might like it." She lifted the celadone cup, sangwa cha, the deep herbal tea that tasted like roasted roots and something almost medicinal. It hit the back of her throat with a warmth that started in the chest and expanded outward slowly. "You come here on your days off," she repeated. "To sit alone. I find it easier to think here. About the buildings?" A small, tired exhale of a smile. "Sometimes." And the folder. He looked at his cup. Junho. She said his name for the first time, and it felt significant in a way she didn't examine too closely. "I told you. What people don't say matters more. So I'm asking directly. Not because I need to know, but because I think you're tired of not being asked." The tea house was very quiet. Somewhere in the lane outside, a child was running, their footsteps sharp against the stone, and then gone. Junho set his cup down, folded his hands on the table, looked out the window at the curved rooftop of the house opposite, where a single persimmon tree grew from a courtyard and hung heavy with fruit the color of small suns. "My father built something," he said, slowly, choosing each word with visible deliberation. "A network. Over many years. It was profitable. It was also not legal in several significant ways." Imani didn't react. Her face held the particular professional stillness of someone trained to receive difficult information without broadcasting her response before she'd actually processed it. "He died 4 years ago, and because I was the eldest son, and because I'd spent 15 years being prepared for it whether I wanted to be or not," he stopped. "Look back at her. I inherited it. All of it, and now you're managing it." "I'm managing the exit from it," he said, and there was a particular emphasis on exit that carried the weight of something that had taken considerable time to decide. Slowly, carefully, in a way that doesn't destroy the people who depend on the income or draw the kind of attention that would make things more complicated than they already are. Imani considered this for a long moment. She thought about the patients she'd watched make choices in crisis. The woman who refused surgery because she didn't want to burden her children, the man who kept returning to the ICU because the illness was the only time anyone came to see him. She thought about what it meant to carry something you didn't choose and couldn't simply put down. "How long?" she asked. "Until it's done?" "Yes. 2 years, if everything goes the way I've planned. 3, realistically." He lifted his cup again. "There are people who don't want me to succeed at that. They prefer the arrangement as it is." And the scar. His hand moved toward his jaw almost involuntarily, the kind of unconscious gesture that belongs to the body rather than the mind. 6 months ago, someone made an argument, a persuasive one. She exhaled, looked at the persimmon tree in the courtyard across the lane. You told me all of this very easily, she said. For someone who closes folders and says real estate like it's a password. You asked directly, he said. No one does that. They should. Yes, he said quietly. They should. The complication arrived in the form of a man named Baek Sang-yeol. Imani learned this not from Junho, but from a colleague at the hospital, a surgeon named Dr. Yoon who had a tendency to carry gossip the way other people carry umbrellas, just in case. She'd mentioned, carefully, that she'd met someone named Cha, and Dr. Yoon had set down his coffee and looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to read. Cha Junho, he said. Cha Junho is, he stopped. Reconsidered. You should be careful. Why? Because Baek Sang-yeol has people watching anyone who gets close to Junho right now. And Baek is not a patient man. She looked up Baek Sang-yeol that night. Not everything. She didn't have the access or the context for that. But enough. He was a name that appeared in business news with curious regularity, always adjacent to legitimate enterprises, always just off-center of anything anyone could point to directly. A man who moved through institutional spaces with the ease of someone who had purchased the right to be there. And he was, if the half-spoken things between headlines could be read correctly, exactly the kind of person who didn't want Junho's careful, methodical exit from the network to succeed. Because an exit meant records, and records meant exposure. And Baek Sang-yeol had been benefiting from the network's arrangements long enough that his exposure would be the kind that ended careers and began court cases. Imani sat with this in her apartment for a long time. The persimmons on her table were starting to soften at the edges, going from firm to giving, the way ripe things do when the moment has fully arrived. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. Are you safe? She typed. Junho's reply came 4 minutes later. Reasonably. Why? Someone in the hospital told me about Baek Sang-yeol. A longer pause this time. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. Who told you? That doesn't matter. Is it true that he has people watching you? Imani. Answer me, Junho. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then, yes. She stared at that single word for a long time. Outside, the neon signs of the street below her window blinked on in the early evening dark. Red, blue, white, red, and the city continued its relentless, magnificent, indifferent motion. Which means they've seen me, she typed. His reply was immediate this time. I should not have, he stopped. Started again. I didn't think it would move this quickly. I am sorry. She read the apology twice. There is something in the phrasing, I didn't think it would move this quickly, that told her this was not news to him exactly. That somewhere in his careful planning, this possibility had existed, had been accounted for, had perhaps been underestimated. She should have been angry. She examined herself for anger the way she checked patients for symptoms, methodically, honestly. What she found instead was something harder to name, a kind of clarity, the sensation of standing at the edge of a decision that is large enough to define what kind of person you actually are, as opposed to the person you've been comfortable assuming yourself to be. She'd come to Korea for simplicity, for distance, for a version of her life that was built entirely on her own terms, without the accumulated weight of everything she'd left behind. She had not come to Korea for this. She thought about the rainy night, the cedarwood smell of a car she should never have entered, the half-second of hesitation that had been, in retrospect, every bit as significant as it felt. She typed, "What do you need?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, and in the pause before his answer, in that suspended, weightless moment between the question and the response, while Seoul glowed and hummed 11 floors below her and the persimmons softened quietly on her table, Imani understood with the full, lucid, terrifying clarity of someone who has just discovered the precise shape of a thing they cannot walk away from. This had never been a wrong car. Thought balloon, she came to Korea to escape the weight of everything she'd left behind, and somehow walk straight into the one kind of weight that doesn't ask permission before it changes you. What do you do when the safest thing you've ever felt turns out to be the most complicated? Leave your answer below. And if this story found you exactly when you needed it, you already know what to do.